If you want to skip to the how-to portion of this video, I'll leave a timestamp, but I want to give a little bit of background. Over the last 6 to 8 months, it has become painfully obvious to me how much my habits and my behavior impact my success. And I define success as feeling like I'm progressing towards my goals. I kind of had the impression that I was putting myself in a bubble, if you will. And by bad behavior and habits, I don't mean the stuff that we all kind of think of immediately as overtly destructive, like smoking or drinking. You know, I've fallen a little bit down that rabbit hole in the past, but I'm talking about something a lot more subtle, a lot more insidious, the kind of stuff that flies under the radar. I'm talking about being a little too glued to my phone, or having kind of an irregular sleep schedule, or being a little too superficial and surface level in conversations and interactions with people. Being a little too comfortable and complacent, that kind of thing. All these things became apparent to me all at once around last summer as I was wrapping up the largest single project I had ever undertaken. It was a huge endeavor. I traveled to a bunch of countries, and when it was all over and the dust had settled, I realized, you know, where do I go from here? Look, I'm 21 years old now. I'm not a child anymore. And I feel like in the past, I've had my priorities a little bit out of whack and chased the wrong kind of things. So it became crystal clear to me that I wanted to get out of my own head and to make a lot of big change in my life, you know, to really re-examine everything and, in a sense, and I'm being kind of dramatic here, so bear with me, to reinvent myself. I don't know if this is just my personality, but I hate that feeling of floating through life, of mental fog, of lack of clarity. I realized that if I want to make big changes in my life, that I was going to need to break things down in a way that is easy to understand and to control and to influence. And that, I realized, was my habits. Our habits and behavior are literally the vehicle that takes us to where we want to go. You know, they are the building blocks of your success. And if I were to break it down to the simplest level possible, it's about increasing the amount of good habits in your life and decreasing the amount of bad habits in your life. Anybody who can do that will see a big change. That's my personal belief. Okay, so how do I go about it? Well, I want to recommend a couple of books that were written by people that are far more qualified to talk about this than I am. But I wanted to first share a little bit of advice based on what has worked for me so far and what I plan to do. So I think the first step is to very consciously decide that you want a change in your life. I think that's step one. And then step two is honing in on what that is, what it is that you want to change necessarily. So let's say I want to be a little bit more productive, and I've been doing research online and I found that, you know, a lot of people talk about morning routines. From there, I would say absorb and surround yourself with as much information as possible. There's a lot, that's the incredible thing about the internet nowadays. There's so much out there. What are people saying works for them? What are people saying doesn't work for them? Just thinking about it a lot, absorbing. From there, I think it's really important to approach things in a way that is sustainable so that you can do this long term. Developing a habit is kind of a delicate process. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, burn out, or get worn out and give up. I think a great example of that is how I started to bullet journal. I did my research, I looked online at what people were doing, and I just started to write things down. Started to just use the journal as regularly as possible. And I wasn't so worried about perfectly organizing all the information and making it super clear. And when I flip through my own bullet journal, I can see my progress as I went through. Of course, in the beginning, it was kind of messy and I didn't quite know what I was doing. But over time, through consistency and persistence, it got better, and I developed systems that I liked, and I continued to grow and evolve with the bullet journal. What mattered most in that instance wasn't that I got it perfect on the first go, or I got it perfect from the beginning. What mattered was that I was just building up the muscle and my relationship to this habit, which has now become absolutely essential to me every morning and every evening to kind of organize my thoughts and help me continue to move forward. I think if you can approach a new habit, something that you want to incorporate into your life as a fun challenge, that changes sort of the psychology of it. And I think that it can make it almost fun to try and see if this new aspect of your life can be a part of you. I started using a habit tracker in my bullet journal where I would mark down a dot each day that I do a specific habit. And that became a really fun and cool way to visually see my habits playing out throughout the month. And I want to mention that even the habit tracker was a little bit messy, and I made some changes, and it was my first attempt. But already the new one that I've set up for myself is cleaner, it's refined, it's using what I learned from the previous one, and it's improving on the system. The point is that you're not going to completely change your life in one day. It's a process, and it's something that can be enjoyable and can be exciting and doesn't have to be overwhelming or horrible. Okay, so enough of my advice. Here are the books that I wanted to share. The first is called The Willpower Instinct: How Self-Control Works, Why It Matters, and What You Can Do to Get More of It, by Kelly McGonigal. It's a wonderful book to understand the mechanics of willpower, and that information has really helped me in my approach towards my habits and understanding how I can kind of give myself the best odds. And the other book is called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, which is by Daniel H. Pink. The book has a really unique look at things because it's not so much focused on what, but rather when you should do stuff, based on our circadian rhythms, based on historic evidence, on a bunch of different studies. And so the information in that book too really helped me in my approach towards my habits. So with all that said, one of my main goals this year is to try and create 100 high quality videos. And that might be really ambitious. I like 100, it's a nice round number, but I'm not so much focused on the result itself, but rather building up the systems and the habits to get there. The point is not so much to, hit that specific number, it's to get out of here, get out of my head, and put myself out there a little bit more. I already have a lot of projects in motion that make me excited to share, but I think what I want you to know is that everything I have planned this coming year is centered around this idea of mental clarity and living better. It's just something that I'm naturally gravitating towards and something I really want to explore. And I think one of the cool things about this project is that, if I can pull this off, anybody can. There's nothing really special about me. I'm not a guru, I'm not an expert. I'm just documenting the process and sharing what I learned. All right, before I get too cliche, although I think we're way past that point already, here's to an extraordinary 2019. Subscribe and sign up to my newsletter if you want to do this thing with me, and I'll see you soon.